Hello, everyone. We're going to get started now. So I'd like to welcome you to this important event pushed out of the league, Anti-Indigenous Structural Racism in Canadian Hockey. My name is Moss Norman, and I'm an associate professor in the School of British Columbia, University of British Columbia. I'm a settler scholar, and for the past decade or so, I've been working and researching with Fisher River Cree Nation in the southern part of the province of Manitoba and Norway House Cree Nation in the more northern part of the province. It is through these collaborative working relationships that I first learned about the problem that we're going to be talking about for the next hour and a bit. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that panelists on this panel are situated on traditional territories, Indigenous territories across Canada, but the event itself is being hosted by the University of British Columbia's Vancouver campus, which is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. We're really excited to be hosting this critically important conversation for a few reasons. One is that it highlights a systemic issue in hockey that more people should be aware of so they can identify the patterns early on and take steps to address it. So part of our intent here is to raise awareness about this issue by discussing how Indigenous hockey teams are being dismantled by non-Indigenous teams who change the rules for league membership, leagues that Indigenous teams help create. Second, we believe that by talking openly and honestly about this issue, people in leadership positions in Canadian hockey will be more informed about anti-Indigenous racism in their sport, and as such, will be better positioned to take steps to address it. To borrow a pertinent question and challenge from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we ask, now that hockey leaders know about anti-Indigenous racism in Canadian hockey, what are they going to do about it? Finally, and perhaps most importantly, we feel very strongly about creating platforms for people to share their knowledge in a more fulsome setting like this one, where their stories are not distilled through the interpretations of others or distorted with an academic language that can be dense and distracting. The overarching questions for today's discussion are questions that we encourage everyone to consider, such as, if hockey is Canada's game, what does it say about Canada and hockey when Indigenous peoples are being excluded from playing the game they love? What does it mean when all Indigenous teams are being pushed out of leagues that they actually helped create? What does Indigenous marginalization tell us about reconciliation in sport in Canada? Hockey's toxic culture has generated more than its fair share of headlines over the past few years. While the sport struggles to address critical issues such as sexual abuse, homophobia, and discrimination, it has yet to tackle the equally damaging problem of anti-Indigenous structural racism that has somehow remained hidden from view. There has been some media attention in this, and we've included some headlines here that you can see on your screen, but nothing that has captured the public's attention as have instances of individual or interpersonal racism. So the panel's going to bring awareness to issues of structural racism in hockey by exploring the experiences of Manitoba's Keystone Junior Hockey League, or the KJHL, and Saskatchewan's Beardy's Blackhawks. Representatives from both organizations are here to speak about the structural racism that they faced, what they did to try and address it, and what changes they'd like to see to amend this institutionalized violence. I would also like to note that settler colonialism is a gendered process, and therefore the processes that anti-Indigenous structural racism plays out in hockey, it's different for men's and women's version of the game. So with this in mind, we've decided to focus on structural racism in men's hockey for this panel today, but our intent is to host a second virtual panel that looks at the unique ways that anti-Indigenous structural racism plays out in girls and women's hockey as well. So please keep an eye out for that panel. There's one more important thing to mention before we carry on, and that is to clarify what we mean by anti-Indigenous racism. We make a distinction between racism and anti-Indigenous racism to accentuate the way in which racism against Indigenous peoples stems from Canada's colonial history and is therefore steeped in taken for granted language, ideas, and structures. That's why it is important to understand the different ways racism manifests itself in Canada, because it affects different groups of people differently. With that, I'm going to turn the mic over to my fellow colleague in kinesiology, Janice Forsyth, who is a professor of Indigenous land-based physical culture and wellness, so that she can introduce you to our panelists and explain the format for today's discussion.
Great, thank you, Moss. And indeed, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce the five panelists that we have here today. As Moss said, we have panelists who are here on behalf of two Indigenous teams who will be speaking to the issues that they faced. From Manitoba's Keystone Junior Hockey League, which they will refer to often as the KJHL, it's a Junior B team. We have Councillor Edward Albert. He is from Norway House Cree Nation. He is the former president of the KJHL and former governor of the Norway House North Stars, which is a team in the KJHL. With him, we also have Sonny Albert, who is also from the Norway House Cree Nation. He is past president and current vice president of the Norway House North Stars in the KJHL. He is also the executive director for Recreation Manitoba. And with them, we have Councillor Vaughn Blacksmith, who is from the Cross Lake Cree Nation. He is the former governor of the Cross Lake Islanders of the KJHL. So we basically have two teams from the KJHL on the panel today. And to discuss Beardy's Blackhawks, which is a AAA U18 team in Saskatchewan, we have Craig McCallum, who is from the Canoe Lake Cree First Nation. He's the Vice President of the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations. He's a former professional hockey player and a former member of the Beardy's Blackhawks. And with him, we have Robert Henry, who is an assistant professor in Indigenous Studies at the University of Saskatchewan, and he holds a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Justice and Wellbeing. And he has been carried out significant research with Beardy's and its forced closure. So just a little bit of background on each of the teams in case you're not familiar with them. The Keystone Junior Hockey League, the KJHL, was formed in 2004. And although there were many reasons for wanting to create the league, one of the teams that initiated it, the Norway House North Stars, wanted to expose their youth to the culture of Southern Manitoba, while also providing youth from Southern Manitoba with an opportunity to compete in a Northern First Nations community, as well as play in front of talent scouts, most of whom are located in urban centers in the southern part of the province. The league was comprised of 10 teams, 5 teams being owned and operated by First Nations communities. This included the Norway House North Stars, the Peguis Juniors, the Opaskwayak Storm, the Cross Lake Islanders, and the Fisher River Hawks. And of course, we have the 3 people from the panel who are here today. And then there are also 5 teams from non-Indigenous communities, and they were the Arborg Ice Dogs, the Lundar Falcons, the North Winnipeg Satellites, the Selkirk Fishermen, and the St. Malo Warriors. In 2018, the 5 teams from the non-Indigenous communities voted to leave the KJHL and form their own league, which meant the remaining teams in the KJHL were the 5 teams from First Nations communities. So today, a number of years later, there are actually 2 Junior B leagues, one that includes teams from First Nations communities and the other that includes teams from the non-First Nations communities. So clearly the league was organized along racial lines, and it continues to be so. And this happened and continues to happen against the will of the First Nations teams. The decision by the 5 teams from the non-Indigenous communities to leave the league happened in private and completely blindsided the 5 teams from the Indigenous communities. So switching over to the Beardy's Blackhawks, their story is very similar. Prior to its removal from the Saskatchewan AAA U18 Hockey League in the 2019-2020 season, Beardy's Blackhawks, it was established in 1994, by the way, so it had been around for a while. It was Canada's only U18 AAA hockey franchise located on and operated by a First Nations community, Beardy's and Okimaka's Cree Nation, which is located about 80 kilometers north of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And you can see the maps there in front of you. On the left is the one for Beardy's. The ones on the right are for the KGHL. So for 25 years, the Blackhawks provided opportunities for Indigenous and that's really important, and non-Indigenous athletes throughout Saskatchewan to develop as players and as people. For Indigenous athletes, the team provided the rare opportunity to pursue elite hockey in a context where indigeneity was honored as a strength and where the team culture was infused with Indigenous values. For non-Indigenous athletes who played for Beardy's Blackhawks, the team provided them with the opportunity to spend extensive time on a First Nations reserve, and for many, it really was their first time there, while also learning about Cree culture and Cree worldview. In late 2019, the Saskatchewan Hockey Association made the decision to eliminate Beardy's Blackhawks from the U18 AAA League as part of a restructuring process where the criteria clearly disadvantaged Beardy's, and the Saskatchewan Hockey Association knew this when they finalized the restructuring. And so we have the panelists here who will dig further into their story. Just a few notes before we carry on, and this is for the audience. We are recording this panel session and the audience discussion. So please keep that in mind when you are formulating your questions for the question and answer session that's going to carry on at the end. Our plan is to share the recording publicly after, so it will be available to a very wide audience. The panel itself will last about 50 minutes, that's 50. And then I will invite questions from you. The question and answer will last about 10 minutes. So please type your questions into the Q&A feature on Zoom. So this means now is a really good time to take a few moments to find the feature on your screen, typically at the bottom, so that you can type when you're ready. And you can type the questions, though, at any time during the panel, and I will make a note of it and ask it at the end. And I say that because your questions are going to go directly to me and no one else, and I will read your questions out loud. I will not identify you by name unless you want me to do so, so please express that in the Q&A. So for the most of you, your questions will be completely anonymous to everyone except me. And as with all forms of engagement, please be mindful of what you ask. This is a hard dialogue for the panelists, and they are demonstrating courage by sharing their experiences with us. So please ask questions that are respectful and that invite a collegial dialogue. I will do my best to get through all of the questions that you type into the Q&A, but I also recognize that time is limited and that might not be possible. So I do apologize in advance if yours is missed. And with that, I'm going to pass over the microphone to Sam McKeagney, a colleague, and he is a professor and head of the Department of English at Queen's University. He's a Settler Scholar of Indigenous literatures with a particular focus on the intersection of hockey, Indigenous masculinities, and Canadian nationalism. So over to you, Sam.
Thanks so much, Janice. It's wonderful to be here to be participating in so significant a conversation with folks I respect a great deal. And I'm really looking forward to what will be shared over the next hour or so. I'm coming to you from my office at Queen's University, which occupies territories of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples in Cataraqui, or what is more commonly known as Kingston, Ontario. We're going to frame our first few questions to provide greater context into these two case studies or these two scenarios of what we're defining as anti-Indigenous structural racism, those pertaining to the KJHL and to Beardy's Blackhawks. We want to get a sense of really what has been special about those leagues and about that team. What happened to change or restructure those sovereign Indigenous hockey spaces? And really looking forward toward what needs to be done to eliminate such structural racism moving forward, and how might we in our various positionalities contribute to that important endeavor. So when I ask questions moving forward, I will try to identify someone to answer, but I really invite everyone to feel free to join in as they have things to contribute. So the first thing I would like to look into is some more context about the KGHL and about Beardy's prior to the restructuring process. And so I'll start by asking you, Councillor Albert, could you tell us a little more about the KJHL when it was fully north-south, and what made the league so significant for the First Nations communities that were involved?
Yeah, for sure. We in the KJHL, I mean, It was called the Northwest Junior Hockey League, and we had about 4 or 5 teams that participated in the league. And what made it really special was our kids were able to participate locally and play against other teams in the north. So as it progressed, we developed that league, and then we're after a certain few years, we were able to. I think it's 3 years. If when the league was established, we were able to participate in the Manitoba Junior B Hockey Championships, and that was a lot of the goal for many teams is to participate in that at provincial level. And the way it was structured was there were 5 teams that were participated in the final 5, we called 2 finalists and a host team, and basically it brought out many of our communities into one location, which they've never seen that kind of caliber of hockey, because at the north we normally send our youth, elite youth, to participate in the Manitoba Junior A League and MJHL, and basically, in order for us to keep them active, we wanted to make sure we have that league established, and it basically had our community members come into our arenas, and basically they participated as spectators. But not only that, they also had a social atmosphere in the arena, and in each arena we see various level of age groups that took part of the bleachers. We had the elders bleacher where they socialized and watched the hockey game. We had a family right in the center of the bleachers. They were engaged with their families and that, and they participated in that. And far in the corner, we had the teenagers. It was a good mixture of culture, I guess, of community members that were involved. But when we came together, the community traveled with the team when they were successful in reaching to that final 5. I don't know if you want to add anything.
So prior to the league restructuring, I think, when the discussion was that we used to have a northern league and then a southern league, and when we got accepted to the KJHL, the idea for most of our First Nation communities was that we get to play somebody new, somebody from the south, something different, and we felt accepted having a community-owned team within the KJHL. So we were always excited to have southern teams come. I'm sure it's similar to a lot of places where we play against the same teams over and over again. Like our colleagues from Cross Lake, we're arch rivals, but we like to kind of sometimes mix it up a bit and go forward from there. So it was very beneficial in terms of having more than 5 teams. It was exciting. It was exciting times for not only the participants, but the fans as well.
And may I ask a follow-up, just with regard to those opportunities for the players to actually play the Southern teams? What were the reasons why it was important for those youth players to have those opportunities, to not just be playing with the Northern teams, for example?
I'll answer that. It was important to us because, like what Sunny said, is it was new people coming in. It was people that we did not see at our local minor hockey tournaments or teams we played in Thompson. it's the same group that plays in the north, right? So seeing southern teams come to our community and play. But one thing I'll bring up here now is that when Norio's went into the league, they went in at a cost. And I'll speak on behalf of Cross Lake. We came in 2014. I started the process when we were accepted for the 2015 season. And we were told you have to pay for the travel of the teams coming to visit you, which was the bus, which was about 5,000. We had to pay for the hotels for the teams coming to play us, which we usually utilize Norihouse's hotel because the teams would switch because it worked out. Two teams would come, they'd play Cross Lake Saturday, then they'd play Noriouse Sunday. And on top of that, we've had to pay meals, which would also, we utilized Noriouse because they had a diner, so it was charged Noriouse, and Cross Lake would pay our one team that was coming to play us, and we would send them on the road with pizzas or burgers, whatever it is. So those are the costs that we had to incur to play in that KJHL league. And that was put on us by when we applied.
I guess, yeah, the first team that kind of moved was Norihouse's Junior North Stars. The reason why they wanted to move was to have all the teams the southern teams come and participate in our community. It's because not many of our members were able to travel 8 hours, or the closest would probably be 6 hours. So we put in a proposal together, and we asked, can we join your league? And we offered to pay for their travel to come into our community and their hotel room. So they agreed to that. We were the first teams. So that was that, and we were on the roll. So eventually, 2 years maybe later on, Cross Lake joined. At the same time, Arborg Ice Dogs joined the same year as Cross Lake. So what happened there was Cross Lake submitted their proposal. Their proposal was to pay for their travel, their hotel, and their one meal for the team that's coming in. Arborg was part of the southern team, so Arborg didn't have that stipulation, I guess you can say. They became the southern team. We had to pay for their travel. We accepted Arborg from Norihouse's and say, yes, we will play, because we wanted our community to, have various teams to come in and showcase their talent.
Yeah.
So Arborg never incurred any costs. We took that cost. The same time, Cross Lake took the costs. And then there was other teams. Lundar came on board. And then we had Fisher River came on board.
St. Rose.
And then St. Rose came on board. We had to incur their travel costs, and as well as who else is a new team? Yeah. So when Fisher River came on board, we kind of said, you take care of your costs. We're not going to ask for your money, because, they didn't ask for much. The only thing that that the teams wanted was $2,000 for to go into their community. So
OCN incurred the same as us.
yeah, and then OCN came on board, and they took the costs we had to cover. Their proposal had to be the same proposal as Cross Lake, and the same with Nelson House, NCN.
So basically that all of the northern teams inherited all the southern teams is their fees there. So I mean, the reason why we do that is because that we felt it was very valuable to all of our communities. And the main thing for all of our clubs is that We just wanted to play. We wanted that opportunity to showcase our players. We wanted that excitement that everybody's looking for. And that if that was the cost, then, you know, our leaders in the communities really wanted to push for that. So we did what we can and we went forward from there.
So thanks so much for those responses. It is quite shocking to think about the level of expense incurred by the Northern First Nations in the name of having these opportunities for the youth. But let's turn things over to Beardy's for a few moments. And I'd like to know, so Beardy's existed for 25 years. I'd really like to know what made that organization special and unique in the Saskatchewan AAA U18 League. And Craig, perhaps I could ask you first, in relation to your own experience, why was Beardy's an important organization and opportunity for you as a Cree player?
It's a lot like what the counselor said. We're very prideful people. You know, we love to compete and show pride and have something to celebrate in our nations. And that's what Beardy's was. It was an opportunity for First Nation players to get an extra look. You know, I was told by my dad growing up all the time that, you know, you have to be twice as big, twice as fast, twice as strong, twice as smart as the white kid next to you, because if you're not, they're going to pick that kid over you based on stereotypes or ideas of who I am as a person based on the color of my skin. And Beardy's wasn't like that. Beardy's, everyone was treated equally, everyone was given equal opportunity. And so for young kids, Beardy's was the place that you aspired to go. You know, for First Nation kids, it was a place you looked at, you know, I want to play there one day. I want to play for that team. And it was because the opportunity that Beardy's gave us, you know, when I was there, the year that I played there, we played against the Swiss national team in a tournament in Calgary. And my uncle, who had gone to residential school and grew up playing sports his whole life, he never imagined that you know, a bunch of little res kids would be playing a national team, you know, in Calgary, Alberta. And so that access, that opportunity, that sense of pride, that's what it was. It was more than just a hockey team in this province. It was something for young First Nation players to aspire to, and we all rallied behind it. And you know, it was really unfortunate to see it go, but yeah, that, you know, it meant a lot to the community, but it was bigger than that. It wasn't just Beardy's, it was this whole region. So
Thanks so much for that. Professor Henry, can you it was stressed earlier on when Janice was speaking about the fact that Beardy's was a desirable venue both for First Nations and Métis kids and also for non-Indigenous youth. What was the significance of playing for Beardy's for some of those settler kids?
Yeah, so again, I think what Craig was saying resonated with a lot of the non-Indigenous players that were also playing there. But when I was doing the research and talking to the youth and talking to the parents and everything else, what they were saying is for some individuals, this is the first time they actually stepped onto a reserve. This is a reserve community, right? So it was breaking down barriers, geographical barriers that people would never have that opportunity to do. And what it was trying to do is build what I would call micro reconciliation. And what I mean by that is that just getting to be in a hockey rink together, being in a dressing room together, breaks down a lot of these social barriers that may be placed on individuals, and they can start playing together as a team. And they're breaking things down, and they're breaking down biases in there. And it was building a lot of relationships for individuals where non-Indigenous players began to see the blatant hidden racism. And I'll say it that way. The idea that it's not as bad as what they were saying. And then all of a sudden they started hearing it and they started seeing it and they started to address it. One individual talked about he played on the team for 3 years. And by the time he was in grade 12, going through, he would hear these little comments in school and start challenging people at school. So this is where you begin to actually move into that sort of true allyship, that you're actually putting yourself there to make those changes. Individuals would talk about the idea that it was there to help, like Craig said, build confidence. Individuals knew that they weren't going to get the chance in other places, and so that they came to Beardy's as a place to come together and get those chances. When we look at it, the idea that, so another narrative that was brought out by an individual was, he was a First Nations guy from Beardy's, and there's a kid that was trying out at Beardy's, but he was so scared to get out of the vehicle. And it was the first time that first time being on reserve and everything else, but he took this kid under his wing and said, come with me. And it was a non-Indigenous kid, and the kid didn't know what to do, but they became like best friends because they made the team together, they hung out together and everything else. And they talked about that experience, that he was so afraid to walk into the rink because he didn't know what to expect. He was afraid of the violence because he was told Indigenous people are violent. He was told that Indigenous spaces are violent, and he had to watch out for himself. So he was afraid to get into the rink. But when he got into the rink, he realized that this is just, it's racist, it's blatant racism, and that these stereotypes that they can break down. So when we started looking at this, the value that Beardy's had was that it was doing things that we're talking about in the TRC without actually having to put pressure on people to do things about the TRC, and making ourselves proud that we're doing it. So it was doing this on an everyday sort of piece where you didn't have to pat somebody on the back for saying, good job, I had to work, I had to do this. Like, it was actually doing the truth and reconciliation work that we're asking people, universities, everything to do right now. It was doing it organically. Not saying it was doing it 100% all the way through, but you're providing a space for non-Indigenous players to make the conscious decision to go to a First Nations community, a First Nations run team, and say, I want to be a part of this team. I want to have a connection to this team. And that means a lot, right? Like that's showing that there's a conscious decision to get out there and to be a part of that. So I think when we look at it and break it all down, Beardy's was doing things that we hope and wish that we were doing it in the academy and in different spaces across. And it's providing those sort of spaces to break down these barriers for Métis, First Nations, and non-Indigenous youth to just come together and play. It's almost like going back in time, right? Like I was talking about this the other day. It's like we bring little kids into a room together and they play. There's the structural pieces that are there that train individuals, that they're not there, they just play. And it's in time we learn about these structures, and Beardy's was about breaking those structures down again and just having people come together and work together as a team, strive for a goal. And they did it. Like in 25 years, they had players that went on to the NHL. They were going to the national championships. They were winning the SHA. So this wasn't just a team that was just kind of put there and whatever. It was a team that had a history of winning and of success for individual and team success.
Thanks so much for those responses. I'd like to ask Councillor Blacksmith, if you might take us through what transpired in 2018, which actually led to the splitting of the Keystone League, and who were the parties involved and how that all unfolded. I think that would be very helpful for us.
Okay, so I'll start with myself and Eddie, we were the governors of our teams, the North Stars and the Cross Lake Islanders, but we did not attend the AGM at that point, which was, the AGM was held on April 28, 2018 in Selkirk, Manitoba. We did have the agenda. If Moss can pull that up, you can see the agenda. There was nothing about them handing in a letter or them splitting in the agenda. And this is our AGM where we do a lot of our governance and so forth, right? So our representatives came back to us and said, we need to come up with a new option. So we come up with either just having a North League, which is the 5 northern teams that play each other for the season, and then the top 2 finalists would meet each other in the final, or we would go with what we had how we had played before was a South, Central, and North. And I believe it was 4, 3, and 3. And then the other option was just the full 10, you play everybody equally. So we met, the governors met, because we got called to a special meeting, which was called on May 28, 2018. It was in, again, at Selkirk in Smitty's in Selkirk, Manitoba. So the 5 Aboriginal teams, we met each other on Route 90 at a Tim Hortons to discuss these options and what we're going to present as option 1, option 2, option 3. And we went to the meeting, and as soon as we sat down in that May 28th meeting, during the report, I'm reading briefing notes made by Councillor Albert. These were briefing notes that we made to kind of keep our timeline. So I'll read it from here. That during the president's report, Rick handed out an unsigned 1-page letter from the 5 teams, Arborg, Lundar, North Winnipeg, St. Malo, Selkirk, dated March 27, 2018, to announce that they were removing themselves from the league.
Yeah, actually, they wanted to dissolve the league. I think from there, I kind of mentioned, I don't think we can do that. We have a voting process here. I think we're going to continue the league. If you like to leave, basically,
you can leave.
You can leave. So we stayed, all 5 teams. We stayed and said, what did Peguis governor says?
Peguis Governor Bruce Sinclair said that you guys can leave, but we're not going anywhere. And this was within minutes of us. We got the letter. We sat down to the meeting. And the meeting was structured, we sit on one side, they sit on the other side. So the letter was handed out to us and we just looked at each other. We didn't know what to do. We were in shock. And that's where I'll say it today, is where the leadership of Eddie Albert and Bruce Sinclair became, because they stood their ground. I was kind of younger. I didn't know at the time what to do. They stood up and said, no, we're not going anywhere. You guys can leave, right? So they left after they realized that they weren't going to do it. And Eddie was good at the paper. He said, well, this issue should have been done at the AGM. And there was no mention of this. So that's what ended up happening. And the biggest issue was they wanted to pull the money out of the account and split it evenly as whoever was in the league the longest would get the bigger share.
Those are the franchise fees and the performance bond.
Yeah, they were trying to split those. So
they already had a formula in place to distribute, and checks were already signed, but basically we said, you leave, but we have to discuss this further.
Yeah. And, as you can see, we did whatever we can to keep all the teams happy. We did everything. We did option 1, A, B, and C, all the way to Z, to make sure that this could be successful. But it was just, even in regards to the process of Robert's rules, they broke that protocol. We got a post-dated letter from those 5 teams. And we just, all the other teams, the First Nation teams, were a bit in shock and didn't know what we should be doing. So after that, we decided, we'll keep going, continue with the 5 teams. And we also wanted to have a meeting with them, sort of to finalize everything and take it from there.
I guess when they bought that letter, I was hurt. It just hit me in my heart and said, why would you do this after what we gave you? And it took for a moment. I had to gather myself to try and come up with and just formalize whatever what we've been following. And basically, this is what we have to follow: the Constitution that they established in the beginning. And they were there longer than any of the teams. I think Peguis served the KJHL the longest. And they're in the southern part of Manitoba, kind of central southern. They're about an hour away from Marburg. Yeah.
So I guess basically what we wanted to do is, I think we spoke to Hockey Manitoba and said, like, we just want to come together and see if this is true. And so we set up a meeting with all the First Nation teams, as well as the other teams that left, and Hockey Manitoba was in there as well.
Yeah, that was June 25th.
Yeah. And so we established everything. Originally, we had the president, which was kind of weird because he was the president for the KJHL, but he was also the president. We were informed that he was the president of the other 5 teams. And so, he said he'll stick around, but then he finally submitted his resignation, I believe. And then that's when I was on board as the president of the KJHL. So we went in that meeting, like, again, had options from A to Z, but there is nothing. There is even one instance where we had the Peguis governor, Bruce. He came to me quietly and he whispered in my ears and said, "Sonny, why don't you just say why don't you just say just go with us, Peguis. We'll be part of that southern. Just see what they say." And that's what he said to me. And so I explained, like, well, so what if we split in between two divisions? So one in north, one south, and so we proposed that. So proposed Peguis would be part of that southern team. And then they didn't go for it. They said, "Oh, okay, well, you got to go through this process. You got to do this. You have to fill out the application and go through there." And so the one outspoken coach for Peguis said, "So you don't want us in our league? You don't want Peguis in your league?" It was quiet, dead quiet. Nobody said anything, and nobody batted an eye. So, for us 3, like, and majority of the governors, we did not want to accept this as a racial incident. It was 2018 at the time, and we just did not feel that this was real still. So I just wanted to make sure that attendants had that perspective of that's what our thought process was. So then after that, we moved on, and we continue on with our 5 teams. Not too sure if you guys want.
I'll add to that with that meeting with the Hockey Manitoba that January 25th. They said in there, one of the reasons that they were leaving was high costs. And at that meeting, and Eddie will say, is I kind of lost my cool, and I said, "What effing costs are you talking about?" I said, that was my exact words. And they couldn't answer us. I said, "We pay for your bus. We pay for your hotel. We pay for your meals. Can you tell me what costs you're talking about?" And there was not a word, and they couldn't say anything. But that's the thing, we did not pull that race card. If we could go back, I believe we would do it different. We would have.
Yeah, I think also when we joined the league, the northern teams, and this was on the proposals that were submitted, this wasn't written down on the Constitution. It was a gentleman's agreement. And the gentleman's agreements, mean a lot. I think, for many. And basically, we weren't able to use that, I guess, that route, to take that route, because it wasn't written on the Constitution.
Yeah.
Hockey Manitoba will say, doesn't say in your Constitution.
For sure. And I want to go back to where Councillor Blacksmith was saying about the cost. So they identified two major things. It was the cost and safety. So safety was broken down to two things. It was broken down to transportation and then safety within the community. So for the transportation side, that was when the incident occurred with regards to the Humboldt Broncos. And so they were afraid to travel north, just because, you know, of course, that's a devastating incident, and we don't want that to happen. But, you know, we take every precaution to have safety in our communities. And then, of course, safety within our community. I think they were, you know, everybody has passionate fans, you know, every so often, and we take pride in our team, but, you know, having that safety, like, for example, we had an incident occur with the Selkirk fishermen in Norhouse, and the fans starting, you know, getting rowdy, I guess, and kind of, so what happened was that because of that incident with Norhouse, North Stars, and Selkirk fishermen, the league decided that, you know what, I think we got to find a neutral location for that.
I think what he's saying there is, they brought it to the governor's meeting, and they said to the governors that, you know, Norhouse is a wild hockey rink. We don't want to go back there. We want to play at a neutral site, right?
Yeah, for sure. And so what the neutral site was Gimli, Manitoba, which was probably about, I'm going to say, an hour south of Peguis. So our fans had to travel from Norhouse, probably about 8 or 7 hours, to go to their home game in Gimli, Manitoba. So that was sort of the end of the regular season, and then during playoffs at that time. So, you know, in terms of the safety side, like we would accept it, everything, but, you know, like what Vaughn said, like what cost was there, what safety precautions we took is baffles us to this day.
Mm-hmm. Basically, Norris was trapped that in 2011, 2012. I can't remember which year that was. That year, Norris had to travel every weekend for their home game and their away games, which incurred a lot of costs. And we protested, we boycotted the final game against Arberg. We were in the final in Arberg. That time we went to the finals because we didn't want this. We want to win that league because this happened to us. And we boycotted the final game. We said, we're going to stay home. We're going to wait for you guys, Arberg, in this rink. And Arberg went to Gimli. So basically, the league said, yeah, Arberg, you won the championship without playing Norway House. And meanwhile, we're waiting in Norway House. So there was
so much give.
Yeah. And we wanted to win. Our leadership back then said, no, this time you come home. We want to see you play because our fans want to watch you play.
Mm-hmm. Those are all such striking examples, and you know the notion of supposedly dispassionate criteria, you know, with the travel element and danger, but then also cost, when clearly the cost wasn't being incurred by those teams anyway, and then the actual barrier that was created by the splitting of the league, when of course the two First Nations are actually in the South. and were not included in the league. It's really striking. And I'd like to turn things back to the Beardy's example, because there's so many resonances. So perhaps, Professor Henry, I could start with you. Could you explain how it was that the Saskatchewan Hockey Association created an argument that Beardy's, was no longer a part of that league?
Sure. So in 2018, it was sent out to all the teams that they would have to reapply for to be a part of the league. So they're talking about this restructuring piece, and it had to do with a lot of it, I think, early on had to do with the idea of the schools, of the hockey academies, and like Shattuck St. Mary, and the league wasn't being competitive enough to go to the Max tournament or the tournament out in Calgary. And so they were trying to restructure that from Notre Dame, bringing in players and so forth. And I think that's where it kind of started. So they started the restructuring business. But at the same time the restructuring was going on, there was always rumors that they wanted to get rid of Beardy's. Even when I played AAA hockey, there was always those sort of rumors that Beardy's wasn't a place that people wanted to go to, and the league kind of wanted to find a way out of it, but they just couldn't find their way at this time. So this idea of restructuring around population helped them to kind of do this. And so the teams had to put in a proposal, and Beardy's went through the whole proposal. There's letters of support given from players, from scholars, from individuals from other leagues to support Beardy's and what they were trying to do with their proposal. And so the proposal went in, and they knew from the beginning that this was not going to be an easy process, but they were hoping that the longevity of the team having success and winning championships, that there was NHL players that have played through the system, that would be enough for them to at least be considered to go through. But it wasn't. And you could see it from the beginning that once the rumors started to come out and everything else, and we were talking, and Craig, I believe, was on a interview at that time talking about his experiences and what Beardy's meant to him, and I was on interviewing about all of this as well. And so the SHA just made a decision and said that it's always been a 12-team league, so we're just going to have 12 teams. And so they removed one of the Notre Dame teams, and Beardy's Blackhawks from the league. And by doing that, what they do is they're able to absolve themselves from this idea that it was a racial issue, that, look, we got rid of another team and put another team in this space. So it helped to absolve that. The issues related to safety and travel became another piece of it here. So when we look at Beardy's, one of the things that they said, well, you need a minor hockey system in order to support it for like a midget AA team, or sorry, a U18 AA team that was there. Beardy's had that. There were other teams that were put into the league and did their reapplication that didn't have those teams. So it was like the rules would apply to certain teams and not to Beardy's, but certain things wouldn't happen. So the big thing was for them was the idea of billeting. And again, this came after the Humboldt bushcraft, right? They don't want to see kids traveling on the highway and everything else like that. So Beardy's doesn't have a strong billeting space. So they used that as the number one thing against them, that you could not billet players and they were traveling. But the truth of the matter is talking to the parents and talking to the individuals who were traveling, they were happy to do that. They were happier for their kids to travel that, because they said the amount of time it took us to go from Martinsville, Warman, and Prince Albert sometimes to Beardy's was faster and safer than driving across the city of Saskatoon. And so this was something that they were talking about, that it was easy. They could get on the highway. It was a double lane highway all the way there. So the idea of safety was safety from individuals who weren't actually asking the questions to the people who were involved in it, and they just made these assumptions that they knew best. The other piece was they said, well, this idea of population, that there wasn't enough people in and around Beardy's, and Beardy's was recruiting mostly from Martinsville and Warman and Prince Albert. But when we look at the makeup of it, that's just where kids were going because they could stay at home and everything else like that. But it was also missing the point that the northern players weren't going to North Battleford, Prince Albert, and other places. They were going to Beardy's. And so they're missing that whole component, that they weren't going to these other cities that are a little bit farther north than Beardy's. They were going to Beardy's itself. And they may have been billeted in Prince Albert with family, where it was cheaper to be billeted there and everything else, and can stay there. And so they use these two sort of clauses in order to do that. But when you actually look at what they were trying to do, what Kelly McClintock was saying was that when people were bringing it to him and questioning him, he said, we can't look at one community over top of the entire province. And so he was using this idea that the engagement and the discussion was for the betterment of the province and the program, and not looking at this. But at the same time doing that, he was giving teams to specific communities. And so he was saying this community is worth more than this community over here. So even the rhetoric that was going on here, they were utilizing this sort of slight, we'll call it slight racism, like this sort of undertone that we know what they're saying, but they're not being open about it. But when you start peeling back and critically looking at what was happening, that's what we began to see. So there was no appeal process. There was no way that they were going to be moving through a lot of this. And when McClintock was doing this, he made the notion that, well, when we look at Saskatoon, because the team from Beardy's went to Warman, which is a community just outside Saskatoon, he said, when we do this, 70% of the 70 players in the province who are playing are from Saskatoon, which had 2 teams. So he made this thing that the more players are here, but the truth of the matter is when you take that population size, Saskatoon technically should have 4 teams due to the population on what they were on what they were trying to prove, to say we were not being racist to move Beardy's out of here. They weren't being they weren't actually following with the same processes when they were doing it in other areas. And that's what was frustrating the community, and that was what was really frustrating a lot of other people, because they couldn't get a straight answer. And just like the KHL, like there were processes put in place that as soon as they were put in place, it blocked any real idea of having a fair and equitable opportunity to put this in. They had lawyers, Beardy's did everything they possibly could, and they knew the 2 things that they were going to hold them up: the billeting and the travel. And that was the only thing. But yet we have Tisdale, we have these other communities where kids are still traveling 60, 70 kilometers because they live on a farm, and that's the closest community. So they're traveling into that space. And it just doesn't make sense. And it still doesn't make sense when you go back and look at all of the newspapers and everything else and the interviews that he was doing. You can see it, that there's no way they were going to let Beardy's get a team, and there's no way they're going to let Beardy's even remotely come in, because they also took away the AA team right afterwards. So it wasn't just the AAA team that left, it was the AA team that also got removed by SHA. So there was no more developmental hockey happening in Beardy's, which is a big impact for the growth and development of First Nations, specifically First Nations hockey in across the province.
One thing that's really striking to me in what you've shared is how the unique qualities of Beardy's were not taken into consideration at all. You know, the fact of what you described as the reconciliatory properties of Beardy's, and this is right in the wake of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. And that is entirely outside of the conversation is really striking. Craig, I pass things over to you. Sorry, Vice Chief McCallum, over to you.
I just wanted to add that there was no uproar from Notre Dame at the time. And a lot of people thought it was weird that Notre Dame was losing a team as well, but there was no uproar. When I played, the Argos served as the Notre Dame Argos, which was the team that they lost. They served as a feeder team to the Hounds program. And so their Argos team was basically a U15, U16 team that fed into the Hounds team. And so they weren't as strong as the Hounds when I played. And so everyone understood them as like a feeder team, a development team that was there to feed into the Hounds program. But there were people that were watching what happened with SHA and the leagues, and that argument about that worry about academy programs coming into the province. Well, Notre Dame didn't actually lose a team. That same year, they received permission from SHA to have a U15 academy program. And so they didn't actually lose a program. And that's why there was no uproar. And so you wonder, because there's no uproar, how long did they know about that? And for Robert, I had it noted too, call it what it is. Call it what it is. It's racism, it's discrimination, it's that's what it is. And like I said, that Notre Dame didn't lose a team. Beardy's was the only community that lost a team. I just wanted to add that.
No, I very much appreciate. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, good point, because as soon as you start talking, Craig, I was gonna go into that just in case you didn't mention that. But this is what's happening, right? Those hockey academies are starting to grow more and more across spaces because they can bring people in and they can stay there, and the growth of the Saskatoon Hockey Academy that's going here as well. But that was what people were saying. They're like, everybody knew it was like, well, Beardy's is getting the hockey academy. They're not losing a team. They're just reshifting that they can actually play in a different league. And that's what everybody was understanding. So the only real loss of anything was Beardy's. The out of province players can't play with the Hounds now. What they could do though is play in the hockey academy team in Notre Dame. So they just reshifted where the out of province players were playing and the in province players could play on both teams, going back and forth. And yeah, the same thing when I was playing. The Argos were the feeder team for the Hounds, except for the 1 year. Somehow the Argos were the team that beat the Hounds. The Hounds were at the bottom, and it was commotion in Notre Dame that year. But to go to the point, yeah, the uproar was only for Beardy's because everybody in the hockey world in Saskatchewan, the underlying thing was Notre Dame was just going to get that hockey academy, and it was just going to be business as usual. They just get to play in a different league now, and that was the point. And so that's why Beardy's was being silenced, because it was like, why is Beardy's only? Again, this can play into it too. Why is it that Beardy's is the only one complaining about this? Why? And again, go to the idea of Indigenous people and the racism that's there and the subtleness of it all, and those stereotypes. Is like they're just complaining again. Look at Notre Dame's not complaining. So this is the reality that I think a lot of people don't understand, and the structural racism that's put in place is that even when we're trying to fight for our teams, for our youth, and for the pride that we want to show, we're seen as complaining or that we're not doing something right. And it's that structural pieces that continue to limit Indigenous engagement in an ethical way. So yeah, and during the TRC and during the reconciliation process, the TRC is asking for this. Why would you get rid of this when the TRC itself is asking for this to actually happen? It's in the calls to say for more space for this to happen. Why are we getting rid of it when you could have been leading the country in this?
And I note that we're getting near the end of the time for the first round before we turn it into the Q&A. But I would like, if Janice and Moss are okay with it, if I ask one more question, because I think it's really significant emerging from what we've discussed so far. And I'm going to quote from an article that Moss and Sonny Albert co-wrote, noting that in response to the claim that the restructuring of the KJHL might be racist, the indication was that there were Indigenous players playing on the Southern teams, and therefore, it can't be considered racist. And you write in that article, while Indigenous players appear to be welcome in the new league, Indigenous teams were not. And I think that's really significant with Beardy's, because the argument was very much the same. There are Indigenous players playing throughout the league. Therefore, there is no need for this Indigenous-run organization. And so my question, I'd first like to ask this of Sonny Albert, and then of Vice Chief McCallum, just in the time that we have. What is it that is so threatening to settler colonial hockey or hockey in Canada about Indigenous teams? What is it about sovereign Indigenous hockey spaces that appears to be being perceived as a threat? And perhaps another way of framing that same question is, why are Indigenous sovereign hockey spaces important, and how can we pursue them? So Sonny, would it be okay if I asked you that question first, please?
Sure. Yeah. So having those spaces, I'll gear it towards our perspective. Having those spaces for all of our communities is so important, especially in Manitoba. We had, a lot of intergenerational trauma that's been happening in our community. And, our people want to have an identity. You know, having the junior B programs within our First Nation community is so important because we get to rally, we get to come together and rally for something for change. And having that opportunity to kind of get excited with those teams is important, especially in our culture if we're looking to, you know, find our identity at this time. It's so important to have those within our communities because we are looking for that identity, but also that community spirit. You know, us growing up, we always had that. We always had that experience of being part of something, and you know, we have take pride and we take all of our apparel. You know, we go even, you know, myself coming from the minor hockey and then going into different junior teams. It's just, you know, being part of a team is so valuable. Not only finding out also our identity, but you know, holistically, it's so important in that regards too. So.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate that response. Vice Chief McCallum, can I ask you the same question?
Yeah, for sure. Why the fear? I think because of misunderstanding, you know, misguided ideas and thoughts about who we are as people. But that's also the same reason why these teams and these leagues is so important. You know, Bobby talked about it. It's an opportunity to bridge gaps, to educate non-Indigenous people about who we are as people, what our values are, what our worldviews are, and to lift some of those fears. You know, you mentioned the academy that is here in Saskatoon, the Indigenous Sports Academy. We've got a U17 program. It's all Indigenous, and they compete in the Academy League here in Western Canada, and that's what they do. They go, and when they go play non-Indigenous, they go into these non-Indigenous predominantly spaces. They engage in a way that is us, and try to help people understand who we are, because sport is it's a really good medium to do that. It's a really good medium to like you said, just play, just be humans together, you know, not to be different. And that's why it was important. And it's frustrating to see that, you know, we're still dealing with some of these things, but these conversations are hopefully gonna change ideas and eliminate some of those fears about including us.
Thank you all so much for the generosity of your responses, and I'll turn things over to Janice to run the Q&A for the rest of our time together.
Sure, thanks, Sam, and thank you, panelists, for that engaging conversation. Clearly, there's important stories here to be told, and I hope we keep sharing them, and I hope more people keep sharing them. I know we were kind of pressed for time, but maybe if you could answer one question, and Sam, feel free to jump in too. Is where are the athletes now? Like where do the athletes go? You know, when they want to play hockey? I know there's teams still in some communities, but do they go now and play like on non-Indigenous teams? Like were they approached by the non-Indigenous teams in the non-Indigenous league or other leagues to go and play? So maybe we could start with Beardy's, if that's okay.
Sure, I'll just answer it quickly. The narrative is that if they played with Beardy's, they'll play in the league the next year. So that was kind of what they were saying. However, we don't know where they went. We haven't done any follow up with any of this. And even now, with Beardy's being closed, there's actually no. I'm not sure if SHA is even tracking this in any which way. And I think this is a huge gap, is to actually look and find not only the players that played that last year to see where they went and see if they played the next year, but also look at players now and to go on the teams and do the makeup, because as Craig said, if you're, and the narrative always is if you're good enough, you're going to find a place to play. But the problem is that for a lot of Indigenous youth, you have to be twice as good. You're not going to be on the third line or fourth line for that developmental space. You have to be on the first or second line contributing automatically. And so you don't, there's this developmental stage at the AAA level that a lot of Indigenous kids from Northern communities don't get the opportunity to, unless they are the best of their entire community. They can't just be an average player in the Midget AAA league. They have to be the best, or they're not going to play on that team. So we actually don't know where the kids who are playing with Beardies, who were on the third and fourth line that were there to develop, we don't know if they went and played the next year or if they just said, I'm not doing this anymore. So it's we don't know.
Thanks, Professor Henry. Vice Chief McCallum, I don't know if you wanted to add a few more words to that, because I know you're embedded in community as well. So I don't know if you, know where some of those kids might have gone in order to play afterwards.
No, same thing. I don't know. I was actually curious to know, what are the stats now in terms of First Nation players, Indigenous players in the league today. But like I said, here in Saskatchewan, we're unique now that we have the only Indigenous sports academy in North America, and we pull a lot of Indigenous players from across the country to come and play here. And so it's, but it's still not the same.
And to the KGHL, I know the context is different there, but if you wanted to offer some final thoughts on what the restructuring of the league kind of impact is having.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of where the league is at, as well as some of our individuals. So as you know, one of our successful candidates that came out of the KGHL is Brady Keeper. He played for Florida and signed with Vancouver. So that was probably one of our success stories. In terms of our individual athletes, us in the North, when our athletes want to be more successful in hockey, we actually send our kids south to have that exposure, because nobody wants to come up north. And so, when we feel, all of our leadership encourages that to make sure that, if they are going to be successful and they stay that right path, they do that. So in terms of the league itself for the KJHL, just to give you guys perspective, is that our goal for the KJHL was to be professional. And so one of the things is that we've expanded. We lost for sure, but we gained Nelson House in addition to a Saskatchewan team. Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation is part of our league as well. And most recently, we just got the Waiwasi Capo Wild, which is a southern team. And from where they're from, they would travel 12 hours to go play Cross Lake and Norrihouse. So, based off of that, the evidence is pretty right in your face in that regards. And then lastly, I think it's important to note that I want to go back to the incident and then talking about our steps after that is that we did file an injunction to stop the teams leaving, and it was spearheaded by Peguis. And so those articles that you've seen in the beginning, that was part of it. Nobody reached out to the governors. Nobody came to us and spoke. I mean, from me as the president and having that opportunity, nobody came to me anyways. I don't know if you guys, so this is in terms of the publicity that we received, nothing came there. So where are our athletes now? That's what we explained, and where our league is now, that's where we're at right now.
Thank you for that, Sunny. Thank you everyone so much for engaging. And to the audience, I know there were a number of questions that were posed, and if we didn't get to it, then there will be a follow-up text piece, a written piece with some embedded audio and pictures, and we can try and address some of your questions more in there, in that piece. So please stay tuned for that. I'm going to hand it back over now to Moss Norman to wrap things up.
Well, thank you everyone for joining today, this evening, and especially to our panelists for sharing their experiences and taking the time to educate us on this really important problem of anti-Indigenous structural racism in hockey. So this is the end of the panel. We're coming to the end of the panel, but it's not the end of the conversation. As Janice mentioned, we're very interested in keeping this conversation going. And as I mentioned earlier in the panel, we are going to try and host a second seminar or panel discussion related to girls and women's Indigenous hockey and structural racism in that sport as well. I would also like to thank our sponsors for this event, UBC's Center for Sport and Sustainability and the School of Kinesiology, as well as Indigenous Hockey Research Network. Thank you very much for making this happen. And finally, I'd also like to thank Shabana Ali for all of their work behind the scenes, keeping us organized and with the communications and everything. Thank you very much, everyone, and take care.
Thanks, Moss. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. Really, really appreciate your time. And Moss, I think I was supposed to also remind you to remember to download stuff after so we don't lose it.
Sam and Sunny have questions in the chat box. Should we leave or should we do a debrief? Do you want to?
Yeah, well, maybe we should do that on a separate Zoom or, yeah, okay. And that will be everybody, Sam, if they have time, or?
Yeah, I was just wondering, because you're talking about outputs after, I just wondered if you wanted to circle back with the participants so they could provide their own thoughts on what that might look like.
Okay, so Bobby, Sunny, and Craig, if you want to check your emails, then the ones that we're using to communicate with. Moss, did you want to send out that Zoom link, or?
I'll do it right now.
Sam? Okay. Okay. So if we all just want to hop off this and then check your email, and then we'll hop on the other Zoom, we could do that. Awesome. Okay. Thanks, everyone.